Welcome to a Community Partners interview where we explore the organizations, opportunities, and resources that look to make change in our daily lives. I'm your host, Paige Whitehouse, and you're listening to Voices for Ability Radio, all abilities, all the time. Today, I'm joined by Terri Jackson from the University of Prince Edward Island, and she's also does collaborations with the Learning Disabilities Association of Prince Edward Island. Thank you for joining us today, Terri.
Thanks for having me.
For our first question today, tell us a bit more about you and what got you to engage with a collaboration with the Learning Disability Association of PEI and why work with individuals with disabilities.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, I've been an educator now for more than 20 years. I started out as a classroom teacher in Ontario and then progressed into roles of special education resource teacher and consultant at the school board level. After I finished my doctoral degree, I took a sessional or contract position at Trent University for a couple of years before landing a tenure track position at the University of Prince Edward Island in inclusive education just over a year ago. When I arrived here, I knew I wanted to engage with some of the community groups to talk more about what inclusion looks like on Prince Edward Island and how me, as a researcher and teacher of inclusive education, could support both their organizations and teachers and children in our systems. And so a fellow called Sandy Slade, who was the executive director for ADHD PEI, connected me with the Learning Disability Association and Cindy, their lead tutor, to discuss potential collaboration where we looked at executive functions, something that's really important for folks with LD, folks with ADHD, and really most neurodiverse persons. And what we did was we wanted to create a workshop series where educators, pre-service teachers, folks who are neurodiverse, and the parents of children who are neurodiverse could come together and learn about executive function skills and get concrete strategies and solutions they can take into their homes to support themselves, their children, and their students. And so we applied for this incredible grant through the Alliance for Mental Wellbeing. We were awarded the grant and have been able to create this collaboration where we're providing these sessions once per month. In fact, we just had one last night.
That's awesome. And I know you were talking about the Executive Functioning Workshop Series, and that was our next question. What is that all about?
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that most people who experience neurodiversity really struggle to develop their executive functioning skills. Typically, developing brains build strong executive functioning skills by usually their mid-20s, but folks who are neurodiverse can generally develop these a little bit later. Sometimes they're delayed completely. And what we wanted to do was provide an opportunity for folks to learn what are executive functions, but also to build specific skills and strategies that would support them with their executive functioning needs. So for instance, last night we talked about the executive function of planning, and we took them through just an introduction to what is the executive function of planning, what are some of the major obstacles that folks with executive functioning challenges might experience. And then from there, we looked at very specific strategies that would help with task analysis, creating environments and systems for success, and also for how to plan and organize your day. So we started with looking at brain dumps and how a brain dump is helpful. We talked about the importance of a visual schedule and how visual structures can support our environment. And then we went on to talk about Goblin Tools, which is a really great AI tool that can break down a task and help with task analysis, before we then went on to talking about planning and prioritizing and got into a bit about the Eisenhower matrix and the Pomodoro technique, which would help folks with their executive function.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the Goblin tool?
Yeah, Goblin Tools is great. It's a free AI software. You just go to goblin.tools. And what you can do, there's a number of different features in the app, but the one I generally like is the magic to do. And so when I click on that, I can actually pop in the name of a tool. So I could say, help me write a 5-page paper on D-Day. And when I press OK, I can choose the level of spiciness. So if something is more challenging for me, I say it's highly spicy, and it will break it down into more steps. If it's less spicy, I can break it into fewer steps. And then when I press the estimator, it'll actually give me time estimates for approximately how long it would take me to do that task. So when we think about folks who struggle with time blindness, which is really common in ADHD populations, having the estimator tool really helps them with making sure that they're not getting off track and doing a task. The other thing that's great about Goblin Tools is it follows you on your Chrome. So when you're logged in on your Chrome browser, I can see the same list on my phone as I would on my computer, as I would on my iPad. And so as I tick items off that to-do list, they're kind of aligning for myself across platforms. And so I'm getting that sense of done, which is really helpful for a lot of folks who need that dopamine rush.
Yeah, that sounds like an awesome tool. I might look into it.
You should. It's awesome.
And without using any names, can you share a success story with me and what supports were put in place when someone asked for help?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'll share an example maybe from my university teaching. Is that a great place, or should I start with something from the Executive Functioning Workshop series?
Both.
Okay, so I'll start with my teaching. So oftentimes when students enter the Bachelor of Education program, it's their second degree. And so they've already completed an undergraduate degree and they've had accommodations through student accessibility services that have helped them to be successful in that experience. The challenge is that a Bachelor of Education degree is so very different from an undergrad. Whereas an undergrad is sitting in lectures, taking notes, reading textbooks, writing tests in many cases, a Bachelor of Education degree is much more interactive and engaging. And so this year we have an individual in our Bachelor of Education program who identifies as autistic. And for them, the transition between, and I'll use the word passive learning because that's what we call it in research, so a more passive learning approach with lectures, note-taking, and tests, to an active learning approach with collaboration, engagement, getting up, moving, was really challenging for them. And so when they came into the program, they were very much struggling with how to be successful with this new style of learning. And we met with them and with student accessibility services and talked about some accommodations and structures that would help them to be successful in our program. And so we set more opportunities for breaks within our program. We gave them space to opt in and out of large-scale collaborations. We offered options to work individually as well as working in teams. And then we actually help them to build some of these collaboration skills because we know once they're a teacher in the classroom, it'll be really critical that they have the ability to, to contend with noise, to contend with lighting, to, deal with the coming and going of people. And so it's been a really great experience for them and myself because I research in the field of neurodiversity, for them to think about kind of the accommodations they'll need heading out into field placement next week. And for me to think as one of their instructors, how am I going to set them and their cooperating teacher and the classroom they're going into up for success in the field? And so I think we've done a really great job so far of helping them be successful in our program. And now I met with the individual just this week, and we talked about the structures we're going to put in place for when they head into their or into their field placement. Now, and then in terms of this executive functioning workshop series, last night at our session, I was talking with parents, and these parents have a child who is struggling a lot with emotional regulation and as a piece of their ADHD puzzle. And they were talking about how they'll say, "Go clean your room." And to them, in their mind, they have a picture of what going to clean your room looks like. What they'll find is they send their child to go clean their room, and 2 hours later, the room is a disaster, and the child is laying in the corner playing with Legos. And so they get frustrated, the child gets frustrated, a meltdown ensues, and then they end up using things like threatening to take away privileges or opportunities to go to birthday parties and friends' houses in order to try to motivate them to clean their room. And so last night we were talking about task analysis, and we gave a specific example, and I used my son as this example of how for him with his ADHD, I say, "Go clean your room." That's just too many tasks. And in his mind, he doesn't know what that means. And so they talked about how they're going to use Goblin tools for task analysis to break down bedroom cleaning for their child, and then to provide one step at a time with reinforcement coming over the process. And so they left our session last night really excited to try task analysis for bedroom cleaning this weekend with their child.
Oh, that's awesome. And I know we were talking about Goblin Tool a little bit as well. Are there any other tools out there to help with executive functioning?
Cheapers, there's so many. I think it really depends on the executive function support you're looking for. So I just talked about emotional regulation being an area of need. And a lot of people who are neurodiverse do experience some type of emotional dysregulation. And I find that any type of tool that will support you with meditation is really helpful. Headspace has gotten a lot of positive press, and there's been some research done on the efficacy of that tool. And what they find is folks who use Headspace consistently actually build an ability to calm themselves down. However, anything with like a variable heart rate monitor or Insight Timer, really any of those apps can be really helpful to help you build your emotional regulation skills. Folks who struggle with time management might like Motion, which is an AI-based planning tool It's quite expensive, so I've only ever tried the free version briefly, but folks I know who have bought the full version have found it incredibly helpful. For a lot of people who experience executive function, um, things like sustained attention can be really difficult. And so there's two tools that I've often used to support sustained attention: Speechify or Google Read and Write, which are both speech to text and text to speech software. And what's great about that is if you struggle to read like textbooks, you can actually instead use text to speech software, and really any of them work. I just mentioned those two options, but where it can read the text to you as well. And then you can engage through auditory processing if that's a stronger modality for you. There's a really neat app that I heard on a podcast last winter called Positive Feedback Bot, where you can actually jump in and it can send you text, basically positive feedback to help keep you motivated. For folks who struggle with working memory, there is an iOS app that's a free download that helps you. It's almost like a virtual filing cabinet, but it's organized by hashtag. So if you can't remember where you tucked something, you can just pull it up on Bear. I love Bear for when I'm going online. I screenshot all these cool things I find all the time, and then I lose them in my camera reel. So what Bear does is I can be like, hey, there was a cool light that I saw. So I just go into Bear and open hashtag light, and I can find things more easily. Another one is called TickTick, which is a version of like a grocery list where you can keep like a list of things to do and you can share it amongst people. So it's really helpful in communities that are looking to kind of collaborate on problem solving.
Oh, that's awesome. One of the apps jumped out at me because I know I have problems with time with my disability, and it was the Motion one. Can you tell me a little bit
Mhm.
more about Motion?
Yeah, so I've only used the free version of Motion, but what Motion is an AI-based software that you can actually use as your day planner. And so what you can do is you pop in kind of your to-do list, and then you block in any appointments that have a very specific time to them. And then what it's intended to do is help with procrastination, chronic late list, missed deadlines, being overcommitted, or difficulties in transition. And then it uses AI to generate a visual schedule for you with like reminders of when it's time to leave. It puts in alarms to remind you to kind of, to get going. It helps you chunk your tasks. So it has like that built-in task analysis piece that Goblin Tools has. And it's really meant to be supportive for things like time management and self-awareness.
Oh, that's cool. I might check that one out actually.
It's quite expensive, so do be mindful of that.
And what is the one thing you see happening over and over again to individuals with disabilities that shouldn't be, and how do we stop it?
That's the ultimate question. I think one of the biggest challenges we have is that our world wasn't set up for folks with disabilities. And so what we've tried to do is we've created like a system and structure, and then we're retrofitting people into this system. And I think what we need to do is as a society, we need to almost like break down the universe and step back and say, okay, we've been working through the medical model of disability for so long. You have a label, we slap a label on you, we treat the label, we make you the problem. And what we need to do instead is move over to a kind of a more human rights model of disability and think instead of how do we create a system that's not accessible for folks? And if you're familiar with Universal Design for Learning out of CAST, what they talk about is if you step back and create a structure and a system that meets the needs of most people, you only need to differentiate for a few of the outliers. So obviously, I'm not going to have Braille textbooks available for every single person because they're not a need for every single person. But word prediction software is something that most people can benefit from. So having universal access to word prediction software is really helpful. Or creating spaces with, nicer lighting so that there's less flickers, less, migraines caused, using ramps. They're not only necessary for folks who use wheelchairs to move around, but they're very helpful for someone who's got a stroller or a broken leg or had a really hard workout at the gym yesterday. So all of those ways are that universal design for learning can actually create spaces that are more accessible to everyone so that when we think about folks with disabilities, they're not an afterthought. They're part of the planning right at the forefront.
And are there any events coming up for the next executive function workshop series?
Yeah, our next executive functioning workshop series is on the executive functioning of time management, and it is scheduled for January 14th, and we're really excited and looking forward to that from 6:30 to 8 at UPEI, and folks can sign up on Eventbrite.
Awesome. And is there any restrictions that if anyone can join the executive functioning workshop series?
So they are held in person in Charlottetown. So you need to have means to get to Charlottetown to get there. We do provide subsidies for childcare and transportation beyond 30 kilometers. So if that's a barrier, folks have that kind of support for them. But it would be very difficult, obviously, for someone from Alberta to join us. Probably just folks on PEI.
Okay. And what is the one thing that everyone needs to know about the Executive Functioning Workshop series?
I think it's really important to recognize that although we're targeting folks who are neurodiverse and people who live with neurodiversity, it's important to recognize that we all have strengths and weaknesses in our executive functioning profile, and we can all step back and learn and grow. And I think taking opportunities to think about how we use our executive functions in daily living and how we interact with neurodiverse folks and what we expect of their executive functions is really different. And so if you're a parent and you have a child with executive functioning needs, to step back and think, okay, how do I look at this through their lens? How can I make this more accessible to them without doing it for them would be really helpful for any parents or anyone else in the community.
And unfortunately, we're running out of time. But for our last question today, if there are listeners looking for information, how can they reach you?
So if you go to the Learning Disability Association of PEI website, they do have a landing page there that has all the information about the Executive Functioning Workshop series. Also, they can just Google Eventbrite, Executive Functioning Workshop Series, LDA PEI, and find information there. If they're looking directly to connect with me, you can Google Dr. Terri Jackson at the University of Prince Edward Island, and I have an Island Scholar profile.
Well, thank you, Terri, so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And that is all we have for today for Community Partners. I'm your host, Paige Whitehouse. You've been listening to Voices for Ability Radio, all abilities, all the time.